The morning the sky learned a new rhythm. March 18, 1944. 26,500 feet above the North Sea, eastbound toward Germany. The cold is the first thing that bites. It creeps through oxygen masks, gloves, the seams of flight jackets, turning breath into frost that crusts along the edges of goggles. Inside B-17G Flying Fortress Lucky Strike, the engines roar with a steady, metallic thunder, for right cyclones beating the air into submission as the bomber group claws its way toward the continent. Staff Sergeant William H. Calder grips the twin .50 caliber Browning machine guns in the top turret. His fingers are stiff. His jaw aches from clenching against the vibration. Below him, the bomber stream stretches for miles, silver shapes locked into rigid formation, each aircraft spaced precisely, mathematically, as engineers intended. This precision is supposed to be their shield. Calder knows the doctrine. He has been drilled on it since stateside training. Fire only when the enemy enters effective range. Short, controlled bursts. Conserve ammunition. Every round must count. Engineers and tacticians insist that anything else is wasteful, chaotic, useless. But today, the sky feels wrong. The sun glints off distant clouds, too bright, too clean. Visibility is perfect, which means the enemy can see them just as clearly. Calder shifts in his harness and scans the high-altitude lanes where German fighters like to gather before diving. His oxygen mask hisses softly with each breath. In the radio room, Technical Sergeant Joe Rains listens to static crackle through his headset. Somewhere behind them, Tail Gunner Corporal Eddie Markham mutters a prayer, fingers tracing a worn photograph tucked into his flak vest. Lucky Strike shudders as turbulence ripples through the formation. Then Calder sees them. Small black specks at first, almost harmless against the pale blue sky. They multiply quickly. Focke-Wulf 190s, high and offset to the sun, holding position with patient discipline. Another group appears lower, Messerschmitt 109s climbing to meet the bombers head-on. This is not a single intercept. This is a coordinated wave. Calder reports the contacts. His voice is calm, but his pulse is hammering. Up front, Pilot Captain Robert Haynes tightens his grip on the yoke. He does not break formation. Breaking formation gets you killed. The fighters do not rush in. They pace the bombers, testing angles, waiting for the perfect geometry where the interlocking fields of fire leave a seam. Calder feels it before he fully understands it. The waiting. The silence before the storm. He has seen what happens when the fighters commit all at once. Cannons flash. Glass explodes. Bombers peel away trailing smoke and flame. He checks his ammunition counters again. Full belts. Hundreds of rounds. Enough to do what doctrine allows. Not enough for what he is about to do. As the first wave starts to angle in, Calder notices something subtle. The fighters are not lining up on a single bomber. They are gauging the entire box. Probing for hesitation. Timing their dives so multiple bombers will be forced to hold fire until the last second. That timing is their weapon. Calder remembers a conversation from weeks earlier, spoken half as a joke in the mess hall. A ground engineer explaining airflow, turbulence, psychological pressure. A wild idea dismissed with laughter. Continuous suppressive arcs. Not aimed to kill, but to deny space. Fill the sky with uncertainty. Useless, the engineers had said. Inefficient. Ammunition wasted into empty air. Calder does not have time to ask permission. His turret begins to rotate. Instead of waiting, he squeezes the triggers early. The Brownings erupt, not in short bursts but in sweeping, deliberate arcs. Tracer rounds streak outward, bright red lines curving through the sky well before the fighters reach optimal range. The sound is different. A constant roar instead of staccato bursts. The vibration shakes his teeth. In the formation, heads turn. Other gunners stare in disbelief. Calder is firing into what looks like nothing. Inside Lucky Strike, the interphone crackles with startled voices. Someone shouts for him to check fire discipline. But the effect is immediate. The first wave of Focke-Wulfs hesitates. Their approach vectors cut through a web of tracers that force them to adjust altitude and roll earlier than planned. Their timing fractures. Instead of a clean, synchronized dive, they break into uneven, staggered passes. One pilot aborts entirely, pulling hard to avoid flying blind through the tracer curtain. Calder keeps firing. He sweeps the guns not at aircraft, but at the air they must pass through to reach the formation. He is not hunting kills. He is rewriting the geometry of the sky. Below him, the bomber group holds steady. No one breaks formation. The suppressive pattern creates a buffer, a shifting wall that buys seconds. Seconds are life. The Messerschmitts begin their run, but they arrive out of sync, piecemeal instead of as a single hammer blow. Other gunners now join in, instinctively mirroring Calder's arcs, expanding the curtain of fire. What engineers once dismissed as useless is spreading across the formation, gun by gun, turning empty air into contested space. The first cannon shells miss wide. No bombers fall out of formation. The sky has learned a new rhythm. Breaking the enemy's clock. The German fighters were trained to read patterns. Everything about their interception doctrine relied on predictability. Bombers held formation. Gunners waited. Fire erupted late and briefly. That rhythm allowed the attackers to measure speed, angle, and exposure down to fractions of a second. Calder's firing shattered that clock. At 26,000 feet, the air is thin enough that every correction matters. The first Focke-Wulf pilot who commits to a dive through the tracer curtain realizes too late that the math no longer works. His windscreen fills with streaking red lines that do not aim for him but surround him. His instincts scream danger. He rolls early, pulling up to avoid flying blind, his firing window collapsing before his cannons can even stabilize. Another follows, then another. Their passes stretch out, no longer overlapping. Each fighter now faces the bomber formation alone instead of as part of a synchronized wave. Inside Lucky Strike, Captain Haynes hears the change before he understands it. The expected concussion of near misses does not come. The aircraft still trembles under engine vibration, but there is no sudden tearing sound of 20mm shells ripping through aluminum. Calder's arms burn. He switches barrels, keeping the arcs moving. He does not stop. He cannot stop. The idea only works if the sky stays full. A voice breaks through the interphone. It is not an order. It is confusion. Someone asking why the fighters are hesitating. Calder does not answer. In the waist, Staff Sergeant Leon Brooks watches a Messerschmitt hesitate at the edge of range, wings rocking as if the pilot cannot decide whether to commit. Brooks opens fire early too, sending a slanted stream of tracers that intersect Calder's pattern. The two arcs overlap, forming a rough lattice that forces the fighter to climb away. Across the bomber group, other gunners are making the same choice. No one formally commands it. They feel it. The airspace around the formation becomes hostile in a way it has never been before. The second intercept wave was supposed to arrive 30 seconds after the first. Instead, it arrives in fragments over 3 full minutes. German pilots curse into their oxygen masks. Their timing is gone. They were trained to fly through brief bursts of defensive fire, not sustained denial. The continuous tracers ruin depth perception, flattening the sky into a dangerous blur where it is impossible to judge exactly when to fire. One Messerschmitt finally commits, pushing through the curtain with grim determination. He lines up on a bomber at the edge of the box. Before he can squeeze the trigger, a tail gunner opens fire, catching him mid-correction. The fighter snaps sideways, smoke trailing as it dives away. It is not a clean kill. It does not have to be. The goal is survival. Calder's ammunition counter ticks down faster than doctrine allows. He knows it. Every engineer in every briefing room back home would be shaking their head. Ammunition was heavy. It was finite. You were supposed to save it for certainty. But certainty is a luxury no one has today. A burst of flak erupts nearby, black puffs jolting the formation. The bombers fly on, steady, unbroken. The fighters have lost their opening. The window where they could tear into the formation all at once has closed. In the cockpit, Haynes glances at his co-pilot. Neither speaks. The bomber is still flying. That is enough. Another wave forms at higher altitude, but they circle longer now, wary. The sky around the bombers looks alive, constantly in motion with tracer fire even when no fighter is in perfect range. The visual effect alone is unsettling. The bomber group no longer looks like a passive target. It looks aggressive. Calder feels sweat under his helmet despite the cold. His hands ache. He forces himself to stay disciplined within the chaos, maintaining sweeping arcs instead of wild spraying. There is method in the madness. He is painting lanes of denial, not chasing silhouettes. A German pilot finally radios a warning to the others. He cannot describe it properly. There is no doctrine for this. Only a feeling that the bombers are doing something wrong, something unexpected. The third intercept wave never fully commits. They probe, pull back, regroup. By the time they try again, the bomber group has advanced deeper inland, closer to friendly escort range. Calder eases his triggers for the first time in minutes. The sky feels quieter, but not safe. Not yet. Around him, the formation holds. No bombers have fallen out. No black smoke trails downward toward the sea. An idea once laughed off as useless has just bought the group precious distance. And distance, over Germany, is the difference between being hunted and being untouchable. When doctrine fails at altitude, the enemy does not disappear. It adapts. As Lucky Strike presses inland, the landscape below hardens into sharp geometry. Rivers glint like steel wires. Factory towns emerge from the haze. The bomber group tightens instinctively. This is where losses usually begin to stack. Deep penetration. No easy retreat. Calder rotates his turret again, scanning higher this time. He knows the fighters will change tactics. They always do. Head-on passes. Vertical slashes. Anything to punch through the defensive box. What he does not know is how long his ammunition will last. His counters are lower now, uncomfortably low. The suppressive pattern works only if it continues. Stop too early and the fighters will rush the gap. Save ammunition and the sky opens again. Below him, a sudden flash catches his eye. A bomber 2 positions off the left wing takes a glancing hit. Aluminum skin peels back. Smoke puffs but clears quickly. The aircraft holds formation. The group breathes again. Calder resumes firing, but with more precision. Shorter sweeps. Denser lanes. He has learned the rhythm of this new fight. The pattern is no longer wild. It is intentional. Inside a nearby Focke-Wulf, Oberleutnant Karl Weiss watches the formation with disbelief. The bombers are not reacting the way they should. There is no pause. No clean firing window. Every approach feels rushed, forced. His gunsight dances uselessly as tracers pass in front of his canopy long before he is ready to shoot. This is wrong. Bombers are supposed to be predictable. Weiss pulls up hard, narrowly avoiding collision with another fighter breaking off at the same time. Over the radio, overlapping voices shout warnings and half-formed orders. The coordination is unraveling. Back in the bomber stream, gunners begin to talk less. They are too busy. The suppressive fire pattern has become shared instinct. When one gun falls silent to reload or conserve, another fills the space. The sky never fully clears. Captain Haynes feels it in the controls. The aircraft is still absorbing turbulence, still threading through flak bursts, but the sharp violent jolts of fighter cannon fire are absent. He knows better than to celebrate. In the radio room, Rains catches fragments of German transmissions bleeding through the static. Short. Urgent. Confused. Calder adjusts again as a new threat emerges. A vertical attack from above, steep and fast. Instead of tracking the diving fighter directly, he fires where the aircraft must pass through to line up its shot. The tracers form a slanted barrier. The fighter flinches. It pulls out early, firing blindly. The shells miss wide. This happens again. And again. Every aborted pass drains the enemy. Fuel. Ammunition. Nerves. Calder is no longer thinking about engineers or doctrine. He is thinking about space. About denying the enemy the one thing they need more than firepower. Time. His arms are trembling now. The vibration never stops. He switches barrels again, teeth clenched, eyes burning from cold and strain. A sudden voice cuts through the interphone. Calm. Measured. Captain Haynes. Keep doing what you are doing. That is all the permission Calder needs. The bomber group pushes deeper. Escort fighters begin to appear in the distance, small and reassuring. The German attacks grow half-hearted, then sporadic. For the first time since crossing the coast, Calder allows himself to believe they might make it. The firing pattern that was never supposed to work has not just saved one aircraft. It has rewritten how the entire formation is fighting. And the men inside these bombers will remember this sky forever. Proof written in aluminum and smoke. The flak intensifies as the bomber group approaches the target zone. Black bursts thicken, walking across the sky in deliberate steps. This is the enemy that never hesitates, never second guesses. Steel fragments rake the air indiscriminately. Lucky Strike shudders as shrapnel rattles across the fuselage. A warning light flickers, then steadies. Captain Haynes corrects gently, refusing to give the flak gunners a predictable drift. Calder eases off his triggers. Not because he wants to, but because the threat has changed. Fighters are scarce now. Those that remain circle wide, keeping distance. The suppressive pattern has done its work. Around the formation, bombers that should be missing are still there. No sudden gaps. No spiraling wrecks. The geometry of the box holds. The bomb run begins. Bomb bay doors open across the formation, a synchronized mechanical bloom. The aircraft becomes more vulnerable now, heavier, slower to respond. This is when German fighters usually strike hardest. They do not. A pair of Messerschmitts makes a tentative approach from low 6 o'clock. Waist gunners open fire early, pushing them off before they can climb into position. The pattern is imperfect now, patchy from ammunition limits, but the habit remains. Calder watches the target slide into view through breaks in the clouds. Rail yards. Smoke stacks. The machinery of war laid out beneath them. Bombardier Lieutenant Frank Owens calls the countdown. His voice is steady, almost detached. Bombs away. The aircraft jolts as the payload drops free. Lucky Strike leaps upward, suddenly lighter. Across the formation, hundreds of bombs fall in cascading patterns, vanishing into the industrial sprawl below. Flak explodes closer now, angrier, as if offended. A bomber to the right takes a direct hit in the wing root. Fire blooms briefly, then dies as the crew extinguishes it. The aircraft holds formation, wounded but alive. This is where the cost of doctrine usually appears. Bombers turning back alone. Easy prey. But today, they turn together. As the formation pivots for home, German fighters make one last attempt. Desperate. Late. Disorganized. They rush in without patience, without the careful timing that once gave them advantage. Calder fires again, limited now, but purposeful. The tracers are fewer, yet still disruptive. The fighters break off quickly, unwilling to gamble against a formation that has already denied them all morning. Minutes stretch. Then miles. The coast appears ahead, a thin line between survival and catastrophe. Escort fighters fully take over, weaving confidently around the bombers. Only now does Calder finally release the triggers. His hands feel numb. His shoulders ache as if he has been carrying weight for hours. Inside the bomber, there is no cheering. No celebration. Just quiet breathing. Men checking instruments. Counting survivors. The formation lands in England hours later, battered but intact in a way that defies expectations. On the tarmac, ground crews count holes. They expect to count wrecks. They do not. Engineers gather around the aircraft, pointing at scar patterns, at angles of impact that should not exist. They compare notes. Something about this mission is wrong in the best possible way. Calder climbs down from the turret, legs stiff, eyes still scanning empty sky out of habit. An officer approaches him, clipboard in hand, brow furrowed. "You fired a lot of ammunition today." Calder nods, unsure whether he is about to be praised or reprimanded. The officer does not smile. He does not frown. He just writes. The engineers come looking for answers. The debriefing room smells of damp wool, oil, and stale coffee. Maps cover the walls, red strings tracing routes that too often end in X marks. Today, there are fewer new ones. Calder sits on a hard wooden bench, helmet on his knees, fingers still slightly trembling. Around him, other gunners talk in low voices, replaying moments they cannot quite believe turned out the way they did. At the front of the room, officers and engineers shuffle papers. These are not the men who fly missions. These are the men who calculate them. Slide rules. Charts. Probability curves. Major Thomas Ellery clears his throat and gestures toward a chalkboard already crowded with figures. Ammunition expenditure was significantly above average, he says carefully. Nearly double in some aircraft. A murmur moves through the room. Ellery continues. Yet losses were significantly below projections. Fighter effectiveness dropped after initial contact. Abort rates increased. He pauses, eyes lifting from the numbers. Explain that. Silence stretches. Finally, a gunner from another aircraft speaks up. He describes firing early. Sweeping patterns. Not aiming at fighters directly, but at where they needed to be. Heads turn toward Calder. When he speaks, his voice is quiet, almost apologetic. He explains the idea as simply as he can. Deny space. Break timing. Force decisions too early. An engineer frowns. He steps forward, chalk in hand, sketching angles in the air. He talks about dispersion, probability, wasted rounds. The board fills with equations that say this should not work. Calder listens, respectful, but unmoved. It worked today, he says. That is not doctrine, someone replies. Ellery raises a hand. Doctrine exists to get results. Today, we got results. The room stills. Outside, mechanics crawl over aircraft, photographing impact patterns. They notice something strange. Hits are scattered differently. Fewer concentrated cannon strikes. More glancing damage. More survivable damage. One engineer kneels beneath Lucky Strike, running a hand over scarred aluminum. He measures angles. He does not like what he sees, because it contradicts his models. But it is real. Word spreads quickly across the base. Not officially. Quietly. Crew to crew. Gunners talk about filling the sky. About making fighters nervous. About not waiting to be hunted. Within weeks, informal notes circulate. Suggested patterns. Recommended arcs. Warnings about ammunition discipline balanced against survival. No manual is rewritten yet. No doctrine is officially changed. But on the next mission, more gunners fire earlier. And the fighters hesitate sooner. The engineers return to their boards, adjusting assumptions they never expected to touch. They do not call the pattern elegant. They do not call it efficient. But they stop calling it useless. When the sky remembers. Spring turns toward summer, and missions continue. Different targets. Different crews. The same cold altitude. The same waiting silence before contact. But something has shifted. German fighters still rise to meet the bombers, still fast, still lethal. Yet their attacks feel less certain now. They probe longer. They circle wider. They no longer assume the sky in front of a formation is empty until proven otherwise. Across multiple groups, suppressive arcs appear again and again. Not always identical. Not always continuous. But present. Enough to disrupt timing. Enough to force early decisions. Loss reports begin to show a trend that makes analysts uneasy. Survivability is improving in ways they cannot fully quantify. There is no single statistic to explain it. Only patterns. Calder flies 3 more missions before being rotated out. He never claims credit. He never tries to teach anyone formally. He just answers questions when asked. On his last flight, he watches tracers arc across the sky from another bomber, long before fighters reach firing range. He feels a strange satisfaction, mixed with fear. The idea has escaped him. It belongs to the air now. Years later, after the war, engineers will write papers about psychological denial, about spatial control, about how combat is not just about hitting targets but about shaping behavior. They will use careful language. They will avoid mentioning the fear, the hesitation, the human factor that cannot be graphed cleanly. They will never fully capture what it felt like inside a vibrating turret at 26,000 feet, hands numb, firing into nothing because waiting meant dying. But the sky remembers. On that March morning in 1944, a firing pattern dismissed as wasteful saved an entire bomber group not by destroying the enemy, but by stealing his certainty. And in war, certainty is everything.